It's indeed a pleasure and honor for me to be able to introduce Dr. Ravi Zacharias to you. Although I feel like in this group, he probably doesn't need much of an introduction. Dr. Zacharias grew up in India. He is an author and speaker. Dr. Zacharias, after hearing and believing the word of Christ, became the leading Christian apologist, I think, of our day, without question. He's been able to speak in more than 70 countries. He's spoken on university campuses such as Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Dartmouth and many others. At Oxford, it goes on and on. Dr. Zacharias actually spoke at the Peace Accord in South Africa. He spoke at the Lenin Military Academy. 3 times he's spoken at the United Nations Prayer Breakfast, at the National Prayer Breakfast of England and of Canada. He's had the opportunity to speak on many occasions to many people. Because of the technology and the blessing of the internet, I've been able to follow him in his question and answers in various universities across the nation. And I've heard him answer questions always in such a patient and such a humble way. On some occasions, some of the questions seem to me to be somewhat juvenile and seem to be almost silly philosophically. And yet Dr. Zacharias always answers those questions with humility and patience, always protecting the dignity of the person answering the question. Dr. Zacharias is a brilliant mind, and as I said, a leading apologist of our day for sure. But most importantly, he has a Christ-like spirit, I think, that honors our Lord Jesus Christ, and I think that will be clear as you hear him speak today. So let's give a warm Alaska welcome to Dr. Ravi Zacharias.
Thank you very much, Joe, for those kind words. It's really an honor to be here and to have the opportunity of coming back to your absolutely beautiful state. It's nice to be landing and seeing all the cameras clicking, all the mountains and all that stuff. It's spectacular. I like to do it too, but unfortunately this time I was not sitting by the window, and the lady was very cooperative, moving forward and backward to help me click a few and just to let people know indeed I was here. Wonderful to be in your city, and it's interesting. People say to me, "How are you doing?" Well, I have to pause and say, now where am I? Because this trip began after I'd done 3 cities in a row in the United States, and then flew on to Israel to do 2 cities there, Bethlehem and Nazareth. And straight from Israel we flew, where did we go to? To Hong Kong. We flew to Hong Kong. I did a few messages in Hong Kong. From Hong Kong flew straight to Washington, D.C. Did 3 sessions there. The day before yesterday, flew from Washington after speaking at lunch to Dallas, Texas. Spoke at Dallas at a dinner engagement for CEOs on Thursday night. And then Friday, of course, headed here. My wife, so we've been to all these places, and my wife chose to join me here. So that tells you that. I always marvel at what places she selects to come to, and I'm getting a terrifying feeling that the gift shops in the hotel are very nice. So maybe we'll have to just, if you could keep her busy instead of me, you might go back with a little more wealth in the bank account than we presently have. I was thinking of a couple of thoughts, since suppose you're dealing with the whole issue of conservatism and so on. I don't often do venues like this, but I was in California once for prayer breakfast, and somebody was telling me when Reagan was governor there that he was standing in line, this gentleman was standing in line to shake hands with Governor Reagan, and in front of him was a man who looked at Governor Reagan and said, Mr. Reagan, I was a Democrat, I am still a Democrat. You were a Democrat, now you've become a Republican. Can you explain it? And Reagan said, when I was a child, I thought as a child. I grew up to put away childish things. He had a wonderful way of responding. Some years ago, I remember being in Poland, and they were quoting a Polish finance minister. He said, if you want to know the difference between America and Poland, this is the way it is. He said, in America, if you've got two ranchers living next door to each other, one with 100 head of cattle and one with 10 head of cattle. The man with 10 head of cattle wakes up every morning and says, Lord, please bless me with 90 more so that I too can be like my neighbor here, each of us having 100. He said, in Poland, the man with 10 wakes up every morning and says, Lord, will you kill 90 of the other persons so that he too can have just 10 as I do? Well, that's the way, unfortunately, things seem to be heading. The difference seems to be wearing out. The difference between those who are able to work life through and those who want it handed in on a platter. And the reason is foundational. Very foundational. These are all symptomatic issues. They are really not issues that are right at the root. They blossom out of something else that is believed. Philosophically, somebody penned these words. First, dentistry was painless, then bicycles were chainless, and carriages were horseless, and many laws enforceless. Next, cookery was fireless, telegraphy was wireless, cigars were nicotineless, and coffee caffeineless. Soon oranges were seedless, the putting green was wigless, the college boy was hatless, the proper diet fatless. New motor roads are dustless, the latest steel is rustless, our tennis courts are sodless, our new religion godless. That lies at the core. That's really what lies at the core and at the foundation of it all. When you think of how thoughts flourish and how thoughts blossom, they come as a result of what lies beneath and what gives people the basis of their decision making. We talk so much of right and left because we have forgotten there's an up and a down. And once you've forgotten the up and the down, the right and the left will swing like a maniac, knocking himself or herself senseless, moving from one extreme to the other, being hit senseless with every knock to each wall. We have to find answers, and we will never find answers by fighting them with symptoms. We can only fight them when we understand what the foundations and what the bases are. And the foundation does two amazing things. It doesn't only give us the thinking, it also gives us the imperative of the methodology. How you go about changing what lies beneath. You cannot use ignoble means with which to defend noble ideas. You cannot fight with ignoble means if you're trying to defend noble ideas. Nobility has both an end and a means in mind. And that's why I'm amazed at how often Jesus remained silent on some tormenting issues of his time, because he knew what lay in the heart of human beings. And his goal was to change the heart. When you change the heart, you change the way a person thinks and the way a person also behaves. I don't know who wrote this, and I've been quoting it for years, hoping somebody will write to me and tell me where exactly it comes from. But I believe it was written by a Canadian writer somewhere in the 80s. He said this: in the 1950s, kids lost their innocence. They were liberated from their parents by well-paying jobs and cars and lyrics in music that gave rise to a new term, the generation gap. In the 1960s, kids lost their authority. It was the decade of protest. Church, state, and parents were all called into question and found wanting. Their authority was rejected, yet nothing ever replaced it. In the 1970s, kids lost their love. It was the decade of meism, dominated by hyphenated words beginning with self, self-image, self-esteem, self-assertion. If you were writing today, he'd also add the selfie, I have no doubt. It made for a lonely world. Kids learned everything there was to know about sex, forgot everything there was to know about love, and few had the nerve to tell them that there was indeed a difference. In the 1980s, kids lost their hope, stripped of innocence, authority, and love, and plagued by the horror of a nuclear nightmare. Large and growing numbers of this generation have stopped believing in the future. I added this: in the 1990s, kids have lost themselves. Trapped in a virtual world of their own, away from voices and from touch. They talk and feel in cyberspace, having now personalized objects and totally subjectivized reality. It's the objects that have become their relational expressions, and the ultimate reality is all within. There is no overarching objective point of reference for what is right and what is wrong. If you take a look at what's happened in our society just in the last few years, it is the embodiment and the expression of a radical left-wing academic way of thinking. This is exactly the kind of thinking you will get in many of our sophisticated institutions today. Extremist views that come from an ideological viewpoint where absolutes are gone, relativism is absolutized, and as Chesterton said, there are many, many angles at which you can fall, and only one angle at which you can stand straight. So we are testing the angles. We are going in every direction, and the philosopher Nietzsche told us, is there any up or down left? Are we not constantly falling? Do not lanterns have to be lit in the morning hours? Who gave us a sponge to wipe away the horizon? When he became an atheist, those were the questions he asked. What sacred games will we need to invent? You see, absolutes are born out of an unchanging reality of the first cause, not the second or third causes. They are born out of our very reason for being. Why are we here in the first place? C.S. Lewis says when a ship goes on into the high seas, it has to answer three questions. Number one, how to keep from sinking, personal ethics. How to keep from bumping into other ships, social ethics. But it has to ask the most fundamental question, why is it out there in the first place? That is essential ethics. When ethics no longer have an essence, listen carefully please, that's when existentialism as a philosophy takes over. And what does that mean? That means your existence defines your essence rather than your essence giving you the imperatives of your existence. Who you are ought to determine how you live. We choose to live in certain ways, how we live, and on the base of that, we end up defining who we are. That's why we are on a collision course with destiny. We are not intended to be living with such lawless, relativistic worldviews at a point at which life has been desacralized, and once life is desacralized, no opinion is sacred anymore, except the demagogic enforcement of the one in power. That's the reality. But we don't see that. We don't understand it. And if you look at the Middle East, you see demagogues have come and gone. You see broken statues. You see those who clench their fist towards the heavens. They've come and gone. And that's why, as they led that way, they've produced a generation of those who can take and lop off a head in front of a television camera for entertaining the masses. They're serious times. These are very critical times. How are we going to move forward? What methods are we going to employ? What are we going to use as a foundation? Is this microphone on? When I move away from there, can you hear me? All right. I've often put it with this kind of analogy. I want to give you two. Years ago, I remember speaking in Columbus, Ohio. I was speaking at Ohio State. I was not the only one. There were several other, actually more even well-credentialed speakers, people like Alvin Plantinga, one of the most noted Christian philosophers in our world today. And as I was being driven to the auditorium, we were driven past a building called the Wexner Center for the Arts. And the businessman driving me paused outside and he said, "This is America's first postmodern building." So I asked him, what is a postmodern building? I know what postmodernism is as a philosophy. He said, well, the man who designed this building said, if life itself has no meaning and purpose, why should our buildings have any meaning and purpose? So he's designed staircases that go nowhere. He's got shapes of rooms that make no sense for what they're trying to do with the room. The whole edifice is an expression in randomness, purposelessness. So he said to me, what do you think about this? I said, I have just one question. Did he do the same thing with the foundation? Or does the foundation have a purpose? Did City Hall give him a license to build a foundation that didn't meet the requirements in order to hold this edifice? You see, you can fool with the infrastructure. You can fool with the superstructure. You cannot mess with the foundation. And the Bible says if the foundations are being destroyed, what shall the righteous do? And so I give you my second analogy, and that is this. It is my goodness. If you take a look at an average person in the country and ask them, what is the root of our existence? They will give you a straight answer. America is a nation of laws. We have our laws as our roots. Russell Kirk, the famous American historian, wrote a brilliant, thick book that side, Roots of American Order. And the whole idea is about the kind of laws that framed our nation. He actually goes to 4 different sources, from England to Rome, to Jerusalem, and to Greece. And he makes the comment years ago that of the 4 that coalesced into forming this nation, the one area we have forgotten is Jerusalem, that really gave us the moral laws. So we assume that we're a nation of laws. On that is the trunk of our political structure. From law emerges the political structure. And on the trunk hang the branches. The branches are our cultural expression. Roots, laws, trunk, politics, branches, culture. So when I talk that way, I say to the audience, but what holds the roots? Roots don't hold themselves. We can't really say that we are a nation of laws unless we define how those laws are held. What holds those laws together? May I suggest to you, if we do not have a moral basis and moral reasoning by which our laws are generated, you will come to a stage of not knowing the difference between what is lawful and what is legal. Many things may be made legal, but not everything is lawful. And the unlawful way in which we think now, we've got our trunk really standing with its roots firmly planted in midair. Nothing to hold it. That's why you are here is so critically important. What you believe in terms of this country and its future is critically important. I've lived in this part of the world now for 5 decades. I have never seen such turmoil, never seen such uncertainty, never seen such lawlessness, never seen such hateful methods by which ideas are propagated. And those who've lived into their veteran years are probably looking back and saying, what on earth has happened? How did we ever get to this stage? The Bible gives us 4 dimensions on which these roots actually have to be held. Number 1 is the dimension of eternity. We must think with eternal values, not just with what's good for me tonight or what's good for me today. If you think only in terms of today, tomorrow could become deadly. We have to have an eternal perspective. When I arrived in Canada in 1966, I was 20 years old. And as I was trying to earn my living, my family had all migrated by that point. We migrated as a family from the city of Delhi in India. And my goal was to get an education, get a job. I was actually going to go into business. And I'll never forget Christmas Day 1968, cold, wintry night in Toronto. And we had gone for midnight service. And my father got us all back in a hurry because we were going to watch something the human eye had never seen. For the first time in human existence, a rocket had gone past the dark side of the moon, and the American astronauts were on their journey home. And what they saw, nobody had ever seen with the naked eye. They saw Earth rise over the horizon of the moon, draped in a beauteous mixture of blue and white, garlanded by the glistening light of the sun against the black void of space. I remember reading this some years ago and trying to remember who even described it that way. I think it was Arthur Peacock from Cambridge. That's what he said. As they went round the dark side of the moon and saw Earth rise over the horizon of the moon, draped in a beauteous mixture of blue and white, garlanded by the glistening light of the sun against the black void of space. What were the first words? See, no philosopher helped them. No poet helped them. No classroom lecture helped them. Almost irresistibly, the lead man of the crew uttered the first words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And imagine from tens of thousands of miles away reading the scripture, and we on earth listening to it. If that same thing happened today, somebody from the ACLU will object to NASA using taxpayer money to propagate the first verse of the Bible. Sad that this is what has happened to us. We have actually deified ourselves in the process and lost the splendor of what is so majestic and what is so inscrutable, but to recognize that only the mind of God in all of his unfathomable wisdom could have created this world. This last week, Stephen Hawking and a billionaire from Russia have come together on a project, as the billionaire has given Stephen Hawking $100 million to start looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. And this man, who is claimed to be the most brilliant man in the world, makes a speech. And the speech he makes is, with all of the galaxies, the millions of galaxies and billions of planets we have, there has to be intelligence out there, and we'd better find them before they find us and destroy us. Well, if they're smarter than us, maybe they're staying where they are, because why would they want to come here? Seriously. Here we have bloodshed, murders, slaughter. We've got people demonstrating. I don't like the word demonstrating, and what's demonstrating? It's all kinds of expressions that they express in that. We are killing each other in our streets. We can't get along from different races. We are not coming together to talk in a civil way, and we are actually trying to be the smartest of the bunch because we have $100 million to find them out there. Think of all the problems on planet Earth. And yet the brightest mind in the world, so grateful that he's got $100 million to find brighter minds out there. How does this jive? If you were a person in your neighborhood, not even having 3 square meals a day, not having a way to make a living, supporting your parents with struggles. When I was speaking at the Senate in Georgia some weeks ago, my colleague Thomas, who travels with me everywhere, we went a little early and we got into a little restaurant, very close, almost walking distance from the Senate, to have a quick breakfast. We were literally at a McDonald's, and the McDonald's was almost like an armed fortress. Iron bars to lock the doors, need a key to go into the restroom. And you looked around the audience and you knew you were in a pretty tough neighborhood. And I had ordered myself some pancakes just to get a little bite, and I only ate about half of one of mine. There were 2 left on my plate. And a man watching us from another table comes over to me and says, "Can I have those if you're not eating?" I said, "You may have them, sir." He said, "Can I get you another knife and fork?" He said, "I'd be grateful." So I went over to his table and gave him the knife and fork. How do you think he'd react if I tell him we've just come up with $100 million to find life on another planet? Now, I'm not knocking exploration. We have to explore. There's no doubt about this. But to think that we are going to solve problems that way without dealing with the fundamental issue of all that is going on right here and ultimately deep within the human heart If we don't get an eternal perspective, we will only think we are the smartest ones trying to find smarter ones out there when we haven't got the brightest mind of all, God's mind on what life is intended to be. We must have the eternal perspective, or we will be finding ourselves forever searching and searching for other areas without ultimately traversing into our own heart. What God said to the children of Israel was, I brought you through the wilderness for 40 years so that you may know what was in your own heart. He could have taken them in 6 weeks, but he considered 2 generations worthy of taking them through the wilderness, because the most important discovery is not out there. The most important discovery is out here. As D.L. Moody said, if you take a man who's stealing nuts and bolts from a railway track and you want to change him, so you send him to college, he says at the end of the education he will steal the whole railway track. Precisely what we are living with today. More sophisticated ways of duplicity. Eternity. We must understand. C.S. Lewis says, have you ever wondered how we use words about time? It's amazing how Lewis picks up things that nobody else does. He says things like this: we are so reconciled, so little reconciled to time, listen carefully, that we are even astonished at it. How he's grown, we exclaim. How time flies, as though the universal form of our experience were again and again a novelty. It is as strange as if a fish were repeatedly surprised at the wetness of water. And that would be strange indeed, unless, of course, the fish were destined to become one day a land animal. We're surprised at time. My, how time flies. My, how he's grown. My son, when he was getting taller and taller, he said, Dad, I'm getting tired of this, my, how he's grown bit. I said, don't you think they should be surprised if I'm not grown? Time flies. My, how he's grown. He said, it's like a fish saying, my, how wet this water is. It lives in that environment all the time. He said, that would be strange indeed, unless we were intended, unless the fish were intended not to live in water, but on dry land. We're not meant to live in time. We are ultimately meant to live in eternity. People say to me, when are you going to get some rest? And my answer is, in eternity. I don't think my rest is really destined for this life. So when that last day dawns and the curtain is finally drawn, I can say, how about eternity, to enjoy my vacation? Nobody's going to ask me, when are you going to get your vacation? I'm already there at that point. Eternity, that deals with your existence. Secondly, it's morality, the whole dimension of morality. You see, when God brought the children out of Egypt, the logical sequence is fascinating. Think about this for just a moment. You and I start teaching people laws from the beginning. Don't do this, don't do that. What God did for them was first redeem them. First, change the heart. Then he gave them the moral law. See, the fundamental problem is not that we are bad or good. The fundamental problem is that we're actually dead. We're dead to God. Jesus didn't come into this world to make bad people good. He came into this world to make dead people live. So redemption precedes righteousness. Redemption and righteousness precede worship. The heart has to be redeemed, then you can be inclined to the moral law. Inclined to the moral law, who shall ascend unto the hill of the Lord, but he that hath clean hands and a pure heart. The transformation of the human heart is prior to the affinity for the law. Thy word is truth. Thy word is a delight to my heart. It's sweeter than honey and sweeter than the honeycomb. Until your heart is transformed, the law will never seem attractive. The law, in fact, will seem oppressive until you understand why that law is given. Chesterton put it this way: before you uproot any fence, always stop long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place. Why is the fence put there in the first place? Do you know when God created us, there was only one law? Just one. Don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because there you do it, you're going to die. What did the tempter say? Not so. You do it and you will become as God. You see, what the original temptation was to play God. And now think of the laws we have after we broke that one law. Just our healthcare law. Thousands of pages just to tell us not to mess with our billing. So you get on to the plane, and what do they tell you? Don't touch, tamper, or disable or destroy the smoke detector. All those needless words. All you need to say is the smoke detector here, don't mess with it, please. But you know why? Because in a court of law, you have to have all those words. Oh, I didn't destroy it, I just tampered with it. Why do we need all that? When my mother was such a sweet lady, and she was so innocent, a wee little thing. And now I'm going to be with the Lord many, many years ago. She died in her 50s. When she would bring home she used to bring it in big old kerosene tins. She would bring biscuits for the family, there's 5 of us, and then we were only allowed 1 each. But she would notice some of them were missing. And then she would look at me and say, "Did you take any of those?" And she was such an innocent lady. Rather than saying yes or no, I'd say, "Mom, do you really think I'm that kind of person?" And she always fell for it. She said, "I wasn't just asking." Till my brothers and sisters would say, "He hasn't answered your question. He's just asked you what you think about it." Because I didn't tamper with it. I didn't destroy it. I just devoured it. I took one after another. See, life has its laws, all based on one law. The law that asks you to be a man or a woman with integrity of heart. Isn't it fascinating if you were to take a survey and ask people which is the institution you distrust the most? Chances are somewhere at the top will be politics. We just don't trust politics. And yet, when we want to plant or anchor our right and wrong, what do we call it? Politically correct. Or politically incorrect. The very institution we trust the least is now the bastion of our moral reasoning. You know why? Because moral reasoning has become a place of power and control when it was intended to be a place of humility and surrender. If I can control you with politics, I have won a victory, but I have not won a moral victory. I have just outmuscled you in the process. You show me a man or a woman for whom morality equates power, and I will show you a monster in the making. You show me a person for whom morality equals a humility of heart and a humbleness of spirit before God, and I will show you a person with a destiny. Moral reasoning. Where do we find it? Philosophers try to tell you and me we find it in rationality. But here's an atheist, Kai Nielsen from Canada. Listen to what he says very carefully, because one of the sentences is very convoluted. Yeah, that's how philosophers talk. So let me read at least this paragraph to you. We have not been able to show that reason requires the moral point of view. Stop with that one sentence. That reason requires a moral point of view. We've not been able to demonstrate that. And then he goes on to say this, or that really rational persons, unhoodwinked by myth or ideology, need not be individual egoists or classical amoralists. Well, he's saying this, unless you're hoodwinked by myth, meaning religion, or ideology. If you're hoodwinked by that, then there's no hope for you. If you're unhoodwinked by that, you can be an amoralist. You can live with your own ego. So the transcendent basis of what we believe is hoodwinking us. It's myth or ideology that's causing us to believe all this nonsense. The rationalist is unhoodwinked by myth or ideology. Now listen to what he says. The picture I am painting for you is not a pleasant one. Reflection on this actually depresses me. Pure, practical reason, even with the good knowledge of the facts, will not take you to morality. In other words, he's saying, rationalizing morality is an impossibility. It doesn't belong in the realm of reason. On the way from Hong Kong to where we were flying to London, and then London to Washington. On the way from Hong Kong to London, I very seldom watch movies. I actually use the time to sleep, use the time to catch up with my emails and all of that. But I was just going through what the movie offerings were to see if there was anything that I'd really be interested in seeing. Oftentimes I look for some of the classics and so on. But there's one called Irrational Man. And so I saw a description of it. It says how a professor of philosophy began to live out his own philosophy and ended up with disastrous choices. I won't tell you the whole storyline, but the description was very accurate. He was an existentialist, quoting Heidegger, Sartre, Camus, Nietzsche, and all of that. And I won't give you the plot. It's not fair to you. But things happen, relationships begin, and he makes one horrible, horrible choice, justifying it in his own mind as a good thing that needed to be done for society. And once he has discovered that he is the perpetrator of it, then he is about to make a second choice to cover up the first one. You see, Hollywood knows deep in their soul that rationalization and reason are not the same thing. They know that. They produce marvelous movies like that. I don't know what scenes are in the real movie. In the airline version, they are edited. So if you do end up seeing it and something risky in there, please don't blame me for it. But I just thought afterwards, that is a perfect storyline for our professors in the academy today. They are typically represented in this one man. Typically represented in this one man. And you know why? Because they think reason and morality are the same thing. They don't realize reason unhinged from the one of ultimate reason and ultimate law will lead you to disastrous choices, because we can rationalize things that are absolutely unreasonable, which is exactly what we've done. So you take the birth of a little life and we stop that birth by rationalizing right to choose. If we stop with the first word, what is right, it will be a different story. See, we talk a lot about human rights. We talk very little about the right to be human. And we talk very little about what it actually means to be human. So if we talk of rights without talking about what is absolute right, take, for example, this statement, Martin Luther King. Unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality, he says. Unarmed truth and unconditional love. Fascinating statement. I don't believe you're going to spiral down the hell of thermonuclear destruction, he says, when he got the Nobel Prize. We want unarmed truth and unconditional love. Where do you get those from? Where do you get those from? If you go to the university, you're going to study science as that which interprets everything in the world. A scientific single vision. Which of the pure sciences tells you about love? Which of the pure sciences tells you that a lab technician ought to tell the truth? That's not what science is. Science can tell you what happens in the lab. It cannot tell you to tell the truth about what happened in the lab. That is not physics then, it's metaphysics. And to be more precise, it's spiritual reality. What scientific theory defines love for you and for me? It doesn't. And that's why Bertrand Russell said, Of all the things he missed in his life, he never learned how to love. Which means he robbed himself of the heart of what the Bible is all about: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Eternity, morality, thirdly, accountability. What is accountability? Accountability basically tells you there's a vertical dimension and not just a horizontal one. If you only think you're accountable to people around you, but not accountable to God before that, all of that, then as cultures swim and change and go in the course of history, our views will change, our beliefs will change, our values will change. One day value A, another day value B. Isn't it fascinating who's really dictating our values today? Somewhere between 18 to 24, they are defining our values. When I was 18 to 24, nobody wanted my opinion on anything. I was speaking to 18 to 24-year-olds at the beginning of the year, 40,000 of them in the Passion Conference, from hundreds of universities and scores of countries, where they were responding in their given venues to the message and came for counseling. Number one and number two were these issues: pornography and suicide. One devalues the other devalues yourself. And they are in the age bracket that's now telling us how to live, what to think, how to define ourselves. Pretty scary when a person that young has not even lived through life and seen reality, that our whole moral basis is now actually coming from the millennial generation. And if you talk to an honest millennial, they will tell you they are struggling more than anything else with one thing: their own identity. They are struggling with their own identity. If you ask an average millennial what is the biggest struggle they have in life, it's the issue of identity and meaning. Where do we find it? And if I don't even know my own identity, how can I develop an imperative and an ought? And not only develop it for myself, but dictate it to the masses. Football teams today determine whether a university president should stay or not. Fascinating. So what we're really looking for is a university that a football team can be proud of. I don't minimize the game. I'm just saying, where are we getting our definitions? I used to be an athlete. I used to be a sportsman. I lived for the field. I lived for tennis. I lived for cricket. That's where I got my whole identity. And ultimately, it sent me to a bed of suicide. I had no ultimate meaning. And all of my buddies who played on the cricket team now try to reach me either because of YouTube or whatever, contact me from other parts of the world, asking the same question: what happened to you? What happened? How did life change? People whom I was closest to are actually flying to see my brothers and sisters to ask them what happened to Ravi. Fellow who never asked me a question for 50 years phones from the other end of the world and says, when are you coming to my country? It's time we better sit down and talk. We played cricket together. They all know what we're talking about. It's left them empty. And so the heart is in desperate need of redemption. Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, like Joseph, who was being tempted by Potiphar's wife, he gave her the only answer which could be unchanging. He said, I can't do this to you, because if I did this to you, I'll be violating the law of God. See, she could have said, everybody's doing it. He could have said, okay, that's fine. She could have said, you know what, if you don't cooperate with me, I'm going to have you fired. He could have said, okay, you got me. He gave her an answer that was unarguably the most solid answer. I can't do this. My master has trusted me with everything. You're not his thing. You're his wife. And I will not violate the law of God. How incredible that thousands of years ago in a palace was a young man who knew how to honor God because he was accountable to him vertically. That's the kind of person we really look for and need in society when nobody is watching, but you know that integrity is exactly what the world desperately needs. Where do we have a statesman or a stateswoman of that character today? I don't have it. Somebody who is honoring right to the core of their very being. Eternity, morality, accountability, existence, essence, conscience, and lastly, charity, beneficence. Existence, essence, conscience, beneficence, eternity, morality, accountability, and charity. We're living in times where it's very easy to get angry, where it's very easy to get upset, and where it's very easy to fight with the weapons of the world's warfare. You know, I keep thinking of Jesus' response to Peter, put that sword down. Why did you come and arrest me this way? You saw me around with you all the time. Why you come with staves and knives and all of that to get me? I was with you all the time. And then he's standing hung on the cross between two thieves. And one of them looks at him pragmatically and says, if you're the Christ, why don't you save yourself and us? And the other one responds, he says, don't you fear God? Amazing. Amazing that a criminal looks at the first criminal and says, don't you fear God? You and I receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man's done nothing amiss. And then he looks at him and says, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. What insight at the last moment of life. And Jesus says to him, today you'll be with me in paradise. How he triumphed and won even the hardcore and the resistant. You and I have the option now to win for the truth. And we win for the truth with the beauty of the truth. And the heart of the beauty of the truth is that in the end the lie will never win. You and I are on the side of truth. And Jesus says, they that are on the side of truth, listen to me. It's this truth that we carry out into the world. And so I say to you, as we move into a very treacherous time, in 1939, the world was on the brink of some horrible things. And a stuttering, stammering king went to the microphone. And he said this, I said to the man at the gate of the ear, give me a light that I may walk safely into the unknown. And he said to me, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. It shall be to you better than the light and safer than the known. Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. It shall be to you better than the light and safer than the known. That's what we need. And how do we put our hand into the hand of God? With this. You see, 20 years ago, not a single person in this room or anywhere would have guessed that the fastest growing church in the world would be in China. Mao Zedong said, it's finished. Christianity is gone, never to return here, never to return. He burned the seminary libraries. He says, gone. Today, I am freer to talk about Christ on a campus in China than in some of the campuses here. God has an amazing way of reversing the trend. Don't give up hope. Today, it may look dark. 20 years from now, somebody may have said, who would have ever thought in 2016 that at one stage America would become the fastest growing church in the world again? The God of history is able to do it, and he always uses a core right in the middle with which to make a change. Sometimes it could be just one person. May God richly bless you. Thank you for giving me a hearing. I pray that Heavenly Father, we're a needy people. We really need you so much. Without you, we cannot move forward. It's too dark. Bless these men and women. Give comfort, give peace, give hope. And may we hear from you in the quietness of our hearts. And Lord, there may be some here who don't quite see the connection between our faith in you and our love for humanity. I thank you that they're here to listen. I pray that you will do your work, as only you can do your work, to make us one and united in the values for which we stand, because you are the source of all value. In the precious name of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to take questions? They weren't sure whether you would. There's a panel later today. I don't know whether you're staying that long.
I'm not staying to a panel. If they have 2 or 3 questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Okay. If you will assemble maybe in one of the aisles, I wanted to welcome our senator here today, Senator Dan Sullivan, is going to address us. And if you do have a question for Dr. Zacharias, please go to the microphones, and we'll just take a few after. Sir. Thanks so much for coming.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. And look, I was not on the program. As a matter of fact, I was not even going to be here this weekend. No plans to be here, and had some last-minute things change, mostly family stuff. I needed to be home, so I decided to just pop in. So sorry, Glenn. Sorry, Daniel. But thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. First, great to see so many friends here. Congratulations on the organizers. This is an incredible turnout. How about a round of applause for them? But I'm gonna keep this real short, and I think you probably understand why it's wise to keep your speech very short after such a wisdom-filled speech from Dr. Zacharias. How about another round of applause for that? So this is just one message I want to leave with all of you. As your senator, I am trying to fulfill the commitments I made as a candidate. It's not always perfect, but what were those commitments? Focusing on less government, more freedom, the rule of law, oversight and accountability for out-of-control federal agencies, a strong national defense, taking care of our vets, and protecting the most vulnerable. That's what I said I'd do. That's what I'm trying to do. And as I mentioned, nobody's perfect. So your job is to hold me accountable to doing that. And if we get these issues right as a nation, I believe our future will be very bright and very much filled with opportunity. And what really gives me encouragement is with engaged citizens like all of you here today, I am confident that we can get these issues right as a nation and as a state. And I think if we do that, the opportunities in the future of Alaska and America are going to be very, very strong. So thank you again. Sorry to pop in on short notice, but
You can
I heard about this, so I thought I was just. So thank you.
Do you have questions? There's a microphone right over there. We'll take 3 or 4, and if you want to raise your hand, I'll bring you up, and you could use this microphone as well.
It's a privilege to be here today, to hear you again. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Dave Rose. the thing I appreciate about you so much is how you're able to bridge gaps between different groups of people. And you treat everybody with humility and respect. And I've seen times folks maybe still disagreeing, but having been on. And in politics today, we're tearing each other apart. We've gotten to the point where we're acting like it's more important to tear down the other person than to make our point. And I think we've got a lot of good points to make, but I wish we had this that you have to get it in a living way. Could you give us some tips on how to work with our values and what we hold dear, but do it in a way that respects us?
If you surrounded by had all the tips, I'd be a millionaire right now. I was telling somebody that it's fascinating to see how the difference between the way donkeys fight and the horses fight. They both are circle, but horses on a circle face each other. And the enemy attacks, they kick against the enemy. Donkeys also form a circle, but they face the enemy and they each other, and when the enemy attacks, they kick each other to death. Please make your application. And the key, I find, as much as they seem strained, if we are facing each other, if we are really looking each other in the eye and understanding each other, we will end up kicking each other in the process. I find amazingly how people can make speeches, somebody near to him down, but thinks he's going to build somebody 10,000 miles away a bridge with that. You don't win by destroying the other person. You simply don't win. You appeal to the motives of somebody when you do that. You have a temporary win, but you're not won. You've lost an awful lot of ground in the process. The fact of the matter is, my mother used to say, once you cut off a person's nose, no one gives a nose to smell. And I recall, with me and traveling colleagues at that time, and Jordan, we just come from Damascus, Syria. And ironically, we were welcomed by Prince Charles, the last heir to the throne in Iraq, in the palace. And he had us in his office for a cup of tea. And to make conversation with him, I said, what do you think is the greatest need in this part of the world today? He said, the greatest need is the same need in every part of the world. Leadership model for our young, how to be a good leader, and the young that way. So he brought youth and leadership. We're not modeling that anymore. Somebody needs to start. Chesterton was asked, what do you think of civilization? He said, I think it's a great idea. Why does somebody start? Somebody needs to start training on how to sit across the table and not to appreciate the person and struggle with disagreements. If we destroy each other in the process, you have an idea of destroying everything. People are important. Ideas can only be important if they keep people prime. And when you talk about noble forces and others who changed history, you see those who were basically they drove first out of the bus because they could throw flames and then sit back there and shoot. Media has a huge responsibility to this country. If they're not careful, one day they've got my ideology that won't give them the freedom they have. Where are we? One more.
Sure, I get this work. Nothing like your basic knowledge and pervasiveness to convince people the reasonableness of our faith in the world. With any of us, to get down to something like it was their moral commitment to autonomy or their giving up sin. John said, "In Christ, people who pay the light, neither cometh the light, lest the garbage in the light be exposed."
Yes, well, in fact, if you get into any media interview and you want to kill the interviewer right off the bat, use the word sin. So what I'm trying to say, you're right. That's really what lies at the heart of it. No one wants to ultimately give up what kind of actions that habits are. And so my mother used to say, sometimes you touch your nose this way,